Morning, everyone. So, yes, hello, it's me today. I'm Graham today, and Graham will be me on Thursday. So I'm doing today and Tuesday. So I thought we would have a little talk about Kemi Badenoch because on first sight it just sounds like she's an idiot who keeps having to U-turn. But it occurs to me there could be some strategy in it. So let's have a look what we think. So just to go over recently, Kemi Badenoch, I mean, we don't really know who is likely. Usually when we get to this point of a Tory leadership contest, because we're quite experienced at them now, we've had quite a few, you usually sort of know who they're probably going to vote for. When, during the last one, we sort of knew that they were going to vote for Liz Truss. The one before, we sort of knew they were going to vote for Boris Johnson. And the last one before that was actually a long time ago between David Cameron and David Davis. And I seem to recall there was a bit of a feeling that, David Cameron was the likely one to win. However, we don't really know in this one, but Kemi Badenoch is probably slight favourite. And there's a couple of reasons for thinking that. First of all, polling is more difficult for party members, but the ones who generally have a good track record of doing it have sort of suggested that Kemi Badenoch is more popular amongst members than Robert Jenrick. And the fact that if you look at the last few days, Robert, ever since it got nailed down to the final two, because James Cleverly unfortunately was kicked out, unfortunate for him, not so much for everyone else, the Robert Jenrick has been doing interviews. Like he did Laura Kunsberg yesterday, he did another interview last week. He's been doing interviews trying to get his point across, because for him now, this is the final, like members are already voting because they can vote electronically. So it's already, some members will have already voted. So he's trying to really rush out and go, look, this is my pitch. This is why you should vote for me as leader. Kemi Badenoch, not so much. Kemi Badenoch not really doing the interviews. And you instantly look at that, and that's because she's not a very good media performer, and she always makes an arse of herself when she does them. But you could also read it as it's a bit like Boris Johnson in 2019, dodging the Andrew Neil interview, dodging a couple of the debates. He was ahead. So a debate or an interview was seen as a potential to slip up. So he avoided them where he could. And it could be that Kemi Badenoch's doing the same, that her information is that she is the favourite, and so why risk it with a media cock-up? So it becomes important as to what she would actually do in government. Now, government, God knows. Hopefully she never finds herself in government ever again. I meant as leader of the Conservative Party. And because the distinction between her, she's actually looking like the better option, in all honesty, because Robert Jenrick is really tying himself to this idea of leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, which would be hideously destructive. But Kemi Badenoch is equally destructive to certain groups of people. So, for example, some of her recent cock-ups have been, she said, oh, maternity pay, yeah, it's too excessive. And then when this was reported, she said, no, I didn't say maternity pay is too excessive at all. No, I don't think it's too excessive. I just think we need a conversation about it. So basically her position now appears to be, no, maternity pay is absolutely fine. We should just not give it to anyone. Because what she was saying is, no, there's too many people reliant on it. So by saying that she thinks now, she's now said that the actual maternity pay is fine, it's just too many people are reliant on it. Well, the only people who get it, and let's be honest, are new mothers. So, like, she's basically saying, oh yeah, maternity pay, keep it at the right level, just don't let anyone be eligible for it. Which is a Tory way of thinking, I suppose, isn't it? Oh yeah, have this, because they do that all the time, by the way. They'll announce things in a budget that actually sound quite good. Oh, we're going to set aside so much money for this group of people. And it's getting people, oh, that's good. You don't get it. You don't get it because they make the process for actually getting that funding really very, very difficult. Yet they get to say, oh, we put this money aside. That is why over the last few years, people who pay attention to this, you will have seen no end of reports because the government made it really hard to access, or although they announced it in Parliament that this fund exists for this group of people who don't read the news, they didn't bother to tell those people about it. So they do these things all the time. But anyway, I digress. So Kemi Badenoch, there was the maternity pay one, there was the minimum wage one. Oh, we shouldn't have minimum wage. Although the thing is, like, you would automatically think, well, that one fits more. That one probably fits better with the Tory party members because, first of all, most of them, let's face facts, are retired. There's not a lot of young Conservatives these days. Or even when we say young, a young Conservative these days could be like 60. There's not many of them either. They're like in their 70s and 80s. So, yeah, you can see how that might fit alongside them because you're talking about something that only affects workers and also Conservatives in general. But then you think there was no moves to get rid of minimum wage when the Conservatives came back to power, was there? They had 14 years in power, and about 7 of those years they had a majority government, and they didn't make any attempt to get rid of it. So they obviously see it as now as one. So again, talking about getting rid of it now maybe shows that she's a bit out of touch. Then the latest one, so it's not something she said, it's a report she's had published, which attacks people with autism and anxiety by saying, oh, they get economic advantages, as if it's absolutely marvellous. Oh, it's absolutely marvellous. If you've got autism, it's like you've won at life. And she describes it as a mental health illness when it's not. And it's and now, so that's been reported, and now she's saying, oh no, this is the media misrepresenting it. Oh, they're so dishonest. They just do this for easy headlines. It's like, yeah, we know, love. But the report is what it says. But again, she's trying to say, oh no, I'm being misrepresented, or the report in this case is being misrepresented. And here's the thing, like, because there's 2 ways of looking at it, and one of them is actually quite strategic. One way of looking at it is the obvious way of looking at it is that Kemi Badenoch is very out of touch. She keeps shooting her mouth off about things because she maybe believes it herself, but she certainly believes that Tories believe it, and she's trying to appeal to Tories at the moment to become leader. So she shoots her mouth off about all of these things that seem like they're in the sort of beginner's guide to being a Tory. And then there's a public backlash because it turns out the general public don't approve of these things. And then she goes, oh no, I didn't actually mean that. Oh no, I meant something completely different to what I actually said. In other words, she's going to be someone who does this a lot, shoots her mouth off, and then has to row back on it and pretend she never said it in the first place. You know, very much like Boris Johnson. We're going to end up with a lot of Boris Johnson type U-turns. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is she might be being quite cunning here. Because part of politics is being able to say one thing to one group of people, another thing to another group of people. Because, you know, politics, particularly broad church politics, is all about getting a lot of people to agree on something when actually they don't agree on things at all. So what she could be doing here is saying what she's saying to appeal to Tory party members, because in the here and now, that's whose support she needs. But when, and she knows that it'll get a backlash in public, and then just say, oh no, that's not what I meant, or that's not what I said, or it's been misreported. That way she gets the benefit of saying the thing to the audience she's trying to appeal to, but casts doubt in the eyes of, or the ears in this case, of the audience that at the moment she's not bothering with, but will have to bother with, because if she does become leader, she's going to have to win over voters as well. So it is possible she's doing that. I mean, there's plenty of politicians who have successfully used that tactic. I mean, I think the way Badenoch's doing it's very clumsy, because it's really easy and not at all convincing to try and pretend that you meant something else, particularly these days when what you said is recorded and people can just share a video of it. But Boris Johnson did it all the time. All the time. He did it before winning the election in 2019 as well. So it is actually possible that she's not... Admiral Pegasus there, she's effing what? My son is autistic, he hasn't benefited, Kemi needs harsh dose of reality. Well, again, we don't know whether she has it or not. As I say, probably the most realistic explanation is she is completely out of touch. Like, her argument in this report, by the way, is because people who have a disability in the case of autism, or a medical issue in the case of anxiety, because they get help for that, they get some special provision for that. She's saying, well, that's not fair, because they're then getting things that other people aren't getting. And it's like, it's the same sort of argument as complaining. And I'm going to read from the report because it's absolutely quite stunning. Where is it? Hold on. There's a quote here. So it says that people with autism get economic advantages and protections and better treatment or equipment at school. And it then says the socialisation of mental health, so everyone has to treat you differently, has failed to improve people's mental health outcomes. It's going, well, first of all, autism is not a mental health issue. But second, it's like, that's a bit like saying, so let's say someone breaks their leg. That would be like me complaining that they're getting hospital care and I'm not, when I haven't got an injury. That's what that's saying. It's like, say, oh, it's not fair because they're getting something and these other people aren't. Do you think that's because they don't need it? And in fact, they're not generally not getting it, because even the last Tory education minister, remember her, Gillian Good effing Job Keegan, even she had to say that people are struggling to get the support they need in schools. That was under her bloody government. But anyway, Christopher there saying we will recall all the commitments Starmer made as leadership contender that he has since rolled back on. Name one. Where's my list? I got a list somewhere. Because people do this all the time. Oh, he broke all his pledges. No, he didn't. Name one. I've got to find them now. I should be prepared for these things. No one's mentioned this for a while, I'm afraid. So I'm not sure. Hold on, I'll just have to find it online. I challenge anyone to name one of the pledges, because people claim that he broke all 10. Name one of them that he broke. He absolutely hasn't. People just think he has because someone wrote that he had and they didn't bother to read them themselves. Absolutely 100% of everything Starmer promised to do, he is doing. Nationalise utilities, he is doing. Railways been brought into public hands. We've already nationalised, although admittedly that was under the Tories, but nonetheless we're very happy to do it. Already nationalised part of the national grid, and there's more coming in energy. Done. Didn't say nationalise all of them, and although there was some mention of moving towards it, which can still happen, that general one is we've already got more nationalisation coming, guaranteed. It's already been put before Parliament. So no. Because all you can do now, if you're going to try and claim he broke anything, when he absolutely hasn't, is all you can do, oh yeah, but he's not gone as far as I would like. Doesn't matter how far you would like. Doesn't matter how far I would like. Brighton Hove actually says that Keegan now has a Lib Dem MP, like Johnson, May, Cameron and Redwood. Oh, I forgot Redwood had gone. Oh, he was going anyway. He stepped down, though. Redwood stepped down, didn't he? Didn't actually lose. But there we go. Admiral Pegasus says, now, children with autism are capable of learning the same as other people, so they need a special way to help them learn basic skills. The rest of us take for granted. Exactly. But I mean, this is what I mean. What she's doing in this pamphlet, it just occurs to me, it's literally like saying that person's getting really attentive care by doctors and nurses for their broken leg. I'm not. Where's my comfy bed? Where's my nurse waiting on me hand and foot? You know, that's what it's like. And it's like, it's a really weird way of looking at things. It's a very weird way of looking at things, but it is a way of looking at things if you are very privileged and very wealthy, and you're fine, and you don't have any need for any special provision. It's a way of going, well, why should I pay my taxes for other people to have these things? When it's like, you would also have those things if you needed them, and you do have things that you need. You get access to things that you need as well. And people always forget, it's like even on a low level, people do take things for granted. You do take things for granted. I remember, when I was unemployed, I've been unemployed a long time ago now, thankfully. And it got to the point, there was no choice between eating and heating. It was really simple. I couldn't afford the gas. It was all that simple. There was no heating. There was no hot water. There was no, like, if it was really cold, it was blankets. Okay, I might just turn on an electric heater for like half an hour just to take the edge off. In the room I was in, that was it. So when I got a job again, I basically had a hot bath every day. It was like a hot bath every day, because then that was a luxury for a while, until I took it for granted again, in which case I don't bother so much. So which part of the energy grid is nationalised? The part that manages supply. Don't you pay attention? It happened. I did a video on it and everything. So the part that works out supply. So for example, on the national grid, you can't just generate electricity, and that it's not like filling up a shop shelf where you go, okay, people have been buying the beans, we'll put some more beans on the shelf. Electricity that's generated has to be used as it's generated. So you have to make, if you produce too much, then you're wasting a lot of energy. If you can't sell it off elsewhere, you're wasting it. You've wasted the cost of producing that energy. If you produce too little, you'll get blackouts. So what they have to do is they have to work out how much energy is likely to be needed at any particular time, and they have to work things out, like, for example, when Coronation Street's on and the commercial break's on, they sort of know a load of people are going to put their kettles on, so there's a spike in supply at that point because they know there'll be a spike in demand. Morning, same thing. You know, if randomly, let's say there was this secret organisation with like 100,000 members that all were going to secretly put their kettles on at, say, 3 minutes past 10 in the evening, it would cause a blackout because it would be an unexpected spike. So you have a group, part of the national grid, or it was part of the national grid. It's not anymore. It's now going to be part of GB Energy, whose job it is to work out exactly how much is required. That is now in national hands. Now, that was the Conservatives. The Conservatives were doing that anyway. Labour just have benefited from it. So we don't say Labour nationalised it, but nonetheless, it's a bit of nationalisation that they're more than happy to incorporate into GB Energy, which is also an example of a energy, or will be an energy provider that is nationalised. There's any others? Have I missed one? Chris was saying, I don't accuse him of abandoning them. I accuse him of deprioritising them in return for a wider appeal. What, you mean win an election? I mean, if you're basically admitting that he's done it in order to get wider appeal, and you're also acknowledging that Labour did not get very wide appeal in this election, but yet nonetheless won. I really don't know what you're arguing about. The 2-child benefit limit, it's still Labour's policy to abolish it, just because they're not doing it right now. And I think don't get me wrong, I think they should. But I also think people who are arguing for that are being disingenuous, because if you are arguing for the end of the 2-child, first of all, most people don't actually know what it means, because when you say 2-child benefit limit, there is no such thing, by the way. But I'm not gonna split hairs. I think I know what you mean, but there is no such thing as a cap on child benefit. Doesn't exist. Has never existed. What we mean is the 2-child cap on universal credit, I hope is what you mean. It's already Labour's policy to get rid of it, but also people that focus on that are going like, so is it all right for households with 1 or 2 kids to be in poverty? Because where's your argument for that? Like, is that all you care about, the 2-child cap on universal credit? Do you not care about households in poverty with 1 or 2 kids, or no kids? But it is still Labour's policy to get rid of it, and they will get rid of it. By the next election, it'll be gone. And by the next election, child poverty will be down, and overall poverty will be down. He said he'd scrap universal credit, still might do. What he said is he'd reform it. Get rid of work capability assessments. Again, they haven't said they're not going to. All of that system is being reformed. You only get to say that any of these things have been abandoned. And first of all, that wasn't one of the pledges, by the way. But you only get to say anything has been abandoned if either they've categorically ruled out doing it, or they haven't done it by the next election. Ivan Ambrose, 9.99 super chat, thank you. Says, because of the Tories, I've got to go private for my mental health treatment. £250 for each appointment. NHS mental health services don't make adjustments for autistic people like me. How dare Kemi? Well, yeah, I also would say my own personal, not my personal, but experience of people I know is, in a way, I mean, I don't want to say you're lucky because you're not, but you are in that you can get it. I've known people who cannot get private mental health treatment. You know, they can't get it. We just don't have the provision in this country for mental health treatment. There might be some places like round London. I mean, what we generally find is when we're, you know, when I've helped try and find it and said, look, we'll pay for the you know, for at least some consultations and see what happens. Can't actually find anyone anywhere around here. You know, the last time we actually managed to find someone, a private psychiatrist, was a remote thing, because we can't find anyone around here. So the only thing they could do was a remote. And that ended up being rubbish. Didn't really help anything. So, and treatment is, I mean, that's just getting a consultation, trying to get a diagnosis. Then the treatment's non-existent around here. So depending on where you are, even if you can afford to pay, there is no provision unless you can travel to London. And because there's only so much even private provision, if a load of people suddenly started using it, this just doesn't exist. BFC Mike saying semantics. Wow, you're the one who's coming out with semantics. Everyone says it's the easiest way to remove kids from poverty. No, they don't. They say it is the single best way to remove a significant number of children from poverty. It's not the easiest way to remove kids from poverty. It only removes some kids from poverty. The only kids it removes from poverty are, first of all, ones who are in a household where there are at least 3 children, and where, and even then, if you were to get rid of that cap, it doesn't automatically raise them out of poverty. So you're talking about a household that's got 3 or more children in receipt of universal credit, and they're just below the poverty line. Now, again, I've made it clear, yes, it should be removed, and it should be removed with all haste, but everyone's focusing on it to the exclusion of everything else. It's like you don't care about poverty, you just care about bashing Labour. Because the fact of the matter is, the people complaining about it have never done anything to help children out of poverty in their entire lives, and yet this Labour government is going to take children out of poverty. By the next election, child poverty is going to be lower. Overall poverty is going to be lower. Absolute poverty is going to be lower. These are the things that Rishi Sunak has claimed are all lower under the Conservatives and are not, they're higher. But these are things that are actually going to be lower under the Conservatives. Nigel Davenport, 20 Australian dollars, I think. Thank you very much there. Oh, in terms of little Australian news, you haven't actually put a comment, but I'll add some in anyway. I noticed that Labour at the weekend have been binning the Tory pro-Brexit appointed members of the Board of Trade, including Tony Abbott. So he's going. Labour are refreshing the Board of Trade, as well as, of course, setting up their Industrial Strategy Advisory Council. So we're going to have a whole new approach to trade and investment as well. Gareth saying universal credit works in theory. It's the 1 month delay that means it don't work in practice. Well, that's exactly the thing as well. You've got people who actually have no money, and it's like, okay, we'll maybe give you some in a bit. What do you mean a bit? I ain't got any now. But there we go. Let's have a look. Some other comments. It said, no parliament can bind the following parliament, therefore newly elected MPs have power to cancel it. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Although, of course, a parliament can bind a following parliament. We know that. Because all you have to do is do something that the next parliament can't just legislate or budget away. So, in actual fact, our hands are tied on a number of things, not the least of which is EU membership. But there we go. So they need to ditch the red lines to make any meaningful difference in terms of an EU-UK reset. You say that, and yet that's not actually true. And it's not what actual EU policy experts are saying either. The red lines do need to be ditched at some time, but it's the people that need to ditch them. I mean, again, I don't know how often I have to say it. Keir Starmer, if you ask people on the street who was the biggest voice against Brexit, it's Keir Starmer. He was the most famous anti-Brexiteer. He didn't suddenly get kicked in the head by a horse, along with people like David Lammy and stuff like that. I know the EU. See, this is what gets me. This is what blows my mind. So people will read something like the UK government say, oh, yeah, we're not all that sold on the EU youth mobility scheme. And people go, Labour are ruling out a youth mobility scheme. And yet they'll read the EU saying, oh, yeah, we're not really sure about this reset. Oh, the EU. It's like, but that's just negotiating position. They absolutely will. All we have to do is rub out this red line or agree to this and agree to that, and they'll change their mind. It's like, make your mind up. What everyone is saying, the UK government, the EU Commission, individual EU Council members, it's really just negotiating positions. You know, again, going into the next election, our relationship with the EU will be easier. And if Starmer can get even some of what he's actually after, that will actually move us closer to the EU. Basically, we're moving towards the red lines. I don't know what people are losing their minds. We're moving towards them. They are going to be rubbed out. Like even Peter Mandelson was saying last week that, yeah, we are going to be joining the EU. We just can't do it yet. Apart from anything else he was pointing out, it's not just up to us. Other EU members have to want us back. And people also cannot behave as if there's this overwhelming desire in the country to go back to the EU when there absolutely isn't. People have to stop posting around doctored polling results. You know, the fact of the matter is most people regret it. That is true. That is not the same as saying most people want to go back right now. We have to move more slowly. And that's what's happening. Look at what Labour have done Brexit-wise straight away. So first of all, completely changing our attitude towards trade and investment. Getting rid of the Brexiteers from that. So Nigel Davenport's just put another 10 Australian dollars there. Please keep Tony Abbott. We thought we'd got him for good. No, sorry, you can have him back. We have to keep Nigel Farage, apparently, even though he promised to bugger off. So I'm afraid you've got to have Abbott back. Unless he just stays here for whatever reason. He's entitled. So the other thing, of course, is remember, and this is now coming before Parliament, the legislation's been presented to Parliament. Labour are passing legislation that will just allow ministers to align our regulations with the EU. And the reason they're passing that legislation is because they want to use it. They want to use it. So we're going to be, on the quiet, aligning ourselves with the EU. And that's something we can do unilaterally, and we are going to do unilaterally. So we're actually going to, from our end, as much as possible, align ourselves with the EU anyway. And all these moves make it easier to then join. I mean, like joining the EU, takes between 10 and 20 years. Typically 10 to 20 years. There was a little flurry in the early days where a few managed to do it much more quickly, but that's because they'd been building up. Before the EU technically came into existence, they'd already been working on it. So realistically talking 10 to 20 years. Well, we can actually join the EU at the same time as if we said we were doing it now and not saying it, just by moving closer, so that when we are openly able to say, yes, we should do this, then we've already done a lot of the groundwork, because that's what Labour are doing at the moment. If you look at what they're doing the groundwork that's needed to join the EU anyway. They're just insisting we're not joining the EU, but they're doing all the same things as if they said we were joining the EU. There would be nothing different in what Labour are doing if we said we were joining the EU as if saying that they're not. But there we go. If we have to keep Farage, can we keep him down a well? Well, unfortunately not. Ironically, the European Convention on Human Rights would probably have something to say about that. So I'm afraid we're not able to. It says, despite what they say, where exactly did we diverge massively from standards? So in two main ways. First of all, the EU obviously is not set in stone. So it has carried on implementing new rules that we have not followed up. So there's issues around, for example, the carbon border tax, which is actually a massive issue. Famously, there's something like pesticides. that the EU have banned and we have not. And that obviously affects trade as well. In terms of some of the food standards have actually they've gone down in order to maintain the to comply with trade deals with particularly Australia and New Zealand. So various regulations concerned with the monitoring of drug use and buying drugs has gone down as well. So there's actually quite a lot of ways in which we've diverged standards, which is why the government had to. Otherwise, why would you pass legislation? Like, there's a lot of people thinking, oh, nothing really happened. Lots has happened. The Conservatives have binned a lot of regulations. Do you not remember the Retained EU Law Act, for example? That binned a load of them. Loads of them. That's been repealed now. But the regulations that were binned haven't, because they were binned. It's just that Labour have now removed the ability of ministers to just chop regulations without referring to Parliament. Kemi says, whatever the American Heritage Foundation group says, and it earns her a fortune in donations. There will be a bit of that as well, although sometimes it's a bit like with Liz Truss, so she listens a bit too much to people like them. But she sort of believes it as well. So it's also an interesting one. Does Kemi Badenoch actually believe it? Or is it strategic? And actually, what does she want? Because it's not always obvious. Sometimes you would think that the person who wants to become Conservative leader wants to become Prime Minister. And I'm sure they would. They wouldn't turn it down. But it is also possible to make a lot of money by being Tory leader in opposition, even if you don't fancy your chances of winning the next election. Because at the moment, let's be honest, any Tory with their head screwed on knows they shouldn't ever think to themselves it's impossible to win. They shouldn't ever think that. But it is going to be bloody difficult. Because in order to win, Labour have to fail. Because like there's various Tories trying to sort of say, well, Starmer came back from like a really crushing defeat and won power. And it's like, yeah, because if the Tories hadn't been seen to fail, he wouldn't have done. It wouldn't have mattered what he promised. If people think, well, the current government's all right, we're okay, they're doing well, it doesn't matter how shiny the opposition sounds. It's a mystery box. They won't vote for it. So you have to the opposition have to appeal to the public, but the government have to be seen to fail. Whether it's true, I say seen to fail, because in 2010 Labour lost, and they actually and they lost because of the banking crisis, and yet they managed that banking crisis quite well. They ended up winning over a lot of international plaudits. But there we go. One thing we will agree on, BUFC Mike, is that we do need proportional representation, and there is no escaping it. It's absolutely true. Not just because it's more apparent to more people that the current system is inequitable. Fundamentally, there's a fundamental problem with our system now, because a first past the post system only structurally works when there are realistically two choices. So in America, for example, their first past the post system for the presidency is just, or indeed any other election, but mostly focused on the presidency, is deeply unfair. It's just as unfair as our system. It cuts out lots and lots of people. It makes most people's votes irrelevant. However, structurally, it works because there are realistically only two choices. You sometimes get an independent in presidential elections, but usually people know they're voting Democrat or Republican. Whereas in this country, that is no longer the case. You know, we've got multiple other parties, and those multiple other parties are getting an increase, and it is an increasing. It's not just a recent thing. I've tracked it going back to the 1970s. They've been getting an increasing share of the vote. You get the odd little blip here and there where something weird happens, like in 2017. But generally speaking, non-Labour Conservative parties are getting an increasing share of the vote. And there comes a point where first past the post will not be able to routinely deliver majority governments, at which point, you know, just regardless of the morality, structurally, you need a different system. But there we go. We've gone over time again. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of day. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe, of course. And until next time, I'll see you later.